Okay, we're ready to watch part 2 of the Portland Transport interview with Mcfarlane. And I always preface my posts regarding Portland Transport with the explanation that Portland Transport saw fit to ban me for life. So that should tell you something about Portland Transport. Anyway, we're not going to get into that right now, but we'll watch this. I haven't seen this yet, so just like the last clip, I'll cut in as necessary.
Well, why don't we switch and move more into the realm of ridership operations and budget. There's been a lot of discussion nationally lately about transit usage being at something of an all-time high, at least I think in gross numbers, highest level since 1956 or something like that.
That was debunked, by the way. Transit ridership has actually gone down when you consider the growth of the general population in relation to transit ridership. So those figures, it may be the largest aggregate ridership, but it's actually less in terms of per capita riders on transit. So that was a public relations propaganda strategy. Something that came out of APTA, but that's the kind of thing you'd see out of TriMet. Take some facts, leave out some other facts, and then make it look the way you want it to look, so that you look good.
And some people remark that, well, TriMet is still not back to the pre-2009 peak. What's your thought about the comparison between how we're doing here versus nationally?
Well, I'd say that we've had some particular challenges over the last 5 years. Now we've stepped up to those, and I think we'll talk about the fiscal year 15 budget that I've proposed to the board, but I think it's very good news for our riders. And some of the investments we've been making this year I think are good news for the riders. One of the particular challenges as you look at the Portland numbers is that we eliminated free rail zone. And
now that excuse might have been valid the first year, but that no longer applies. So they keep rolling out that as the excuse for the ridership plunge, and it's bogus. It's a bogus argument. I mean, you can say that might have had something to do with it for the first year figures after they ended the Fairless Square, but now this is several years later, and the point also is the bus ridership didn't fall when they ended ridership on Fairless Square on buses. But so I wonder about his. This sounds like an APTA type thing. We'll find an excuse that we can use, and we'll use it over and over and over. And this is what they do. They're not honest about anything.
From free to requiring a fare is a big jump in fare, and did indeed reduce ridership by a pretty noticeable chunk, a couple million a year when you start adding it all up. So I think that's the biggest problem that we found. We actually are beginning to see some really positive trends in ridership, particularly peak hour ridership continues to grow. And matter of fact,
there you have it again. I mean, they look for any sort of positive statistic within the general statistic, and they'll emphasize that over and over and over. And now its peak ridership is higher, as if that's some kind of significant fact. The transit system is down. Trying to find one period of time that it's up is bogus.
Some of the investments perhaps we'll talk about in the fiscal year 15 budget are really targeted at overcrowding and schedule reliability in the peak hour, which is one of our growing problems. I think there is that difference first of all, we did reduce free rail zone, we did increase the fares, we did reduce some service. Those all have effects. But they've been pretty modest when you look at them overall.
More bogus information coming from Mcfarlane. Every other transit district in the country raised fares and cut services, and they still saw ridership growth. Okay, he's saying, oh, it's insignificant, basically. Well, he's wrong. He's lying. He's tweaking the facts again.
And I think the really good news is that as you look at our service improvements starting last September, again, March 1st of this year, we added back frequent service intervals to all of our lines, at our frequent service lines during the midday. By the time you get to the end of fiscal year 15, we'll be up at pre-recession service levels again. Now, some people say, Matt, that took a long time, and I would be the first one to say it took a long time, but it feels very good to be back there, frankly. So
Well, that obviously has some serious effects. When your buses are unreliable and packed to the gills, people aren't going to ride them. It's just common sense. If it's an unpleasant experience to ride transit, people that can avoid it will. And TriMet, after they cut the service back so significantly, has been overcrowded and late. And nobody in their right mind would use it if they didn't have to.
I think we've had to deal with some particular problems and some particular challenges which have affected our number, but I think overall we're seeing very hopeful trends. And I know people will respond to the service increases that we have programmed.
Okay. So let's transition then into the budget discussion. I think there's something of a dichotomy in what our readers are hearing. The state just completed their audit of TriMet, and I think it really underscored the unfunded liabilities.
Yes.
There's obviously the good news that you've just shared, restoring frequent service lines and a trend line to continue doing that. I think a lot of people can't square those in their mind. How are we funding restorations of service when we still have these unfunded liabilities looming on the horizon? Can you connect those?
Let's correct Humpty Dumpty there. I think Chris Smith looks like Humpty Dumpty. Anyway, he needs to be corrected. Unfunded liabilities, okay? That word liabilities is chosen to have an emotional reaction on the public. It's actually unfunded obligations. They were obligations that the company made to their employees. They intentionally did not fund those things. At the same time, they were buying all this other stuff, increasing their executive staff. There's a million things they did with that money, and John Charles pointed it out. What they did was criminal. Okay, they're unfunded obligations, not liabilities.
Thoughts for our readers?
Well, the first thing I'd say is the TriMet budget is not a soundbite, so there's a lot of moving pieces to it. So let me try to go through some of those if I can. The first thing that I'd say is that we have been on an increase on the payroll tax for over the last 10 years, and the last one of those increases actually went into effect January 1st of this year. And all of the service that we've been adding up to now really been funded out of that particular increase. The second thing I'd add is that...
Before you go on to your second point, just following up on that, how much of that is also the economic recovery and the fact that...
Well, that's where I was going to go.
Okay.
Exactly, and that's exactly where I was going to go, is that the second factor is that the payroll tax actually has been responding to the growing economy that we've got here in the region. And, it was slow to come out of this recession. We stayed down at the bottom. We skated along the bottom there for quite a while, but now it's beginning to come up. It's not what I would call gangbusters growth, but it's very solid growth. And so we're beginning to see a response in terms of the payroll tax, and that's very, very helpful to us. The particular...
Now, Mcfarlane just said that all of the increased services have come out of the increasing payroll tax rate. Well, let's look at that comment for a minute, because in the last 10 years we saw a WES, a streetcar, a green line, a red line, and a yellow line. Okay, we saw significant growth, operational expenses, and he's trying to tell us that all of that growth was funded by the increase in payroll taxes. Well, number one, it's a lie, because that was going on during the so-called Great Recession. And number two, the real reason for the TriMet budget shortfall is that. It's the expansion. You can't just keep adding hundreds of employees and expect to be able to pay what you've agreed to. And that's the real problem with TriMet, is the unbridled growth and their lack of stopping that. You know, they just spend money on all kinds of stuff. They grow these max lines like they're growing on trees. They're very expensive to operate. They always say, "Oh, it's cheaper than having a bus." Well, that's a bunch of crap, because you need row people, you need controllers, you need supervisors. It's plagued with problems constantly, and it costs billions in capital investment. So yeah, you know, it's really a function of TriMet mismanagement that they're in this situation.
Detail that helps us with service is that a lot of that payroll tax growth is what we call real growth. It's not due to inflation, because inflation remains pretty low, and so that's a very good thing. The third element that I think allows a little room in the budget is that we have made some progress on our cost structure. You might recall that we did secure an arbitration contract change about 1.5 years ago now that really moved our employees into I think a still pretty generous 90-10 healthcare plan. And as we look at that, it has actually made a difference. Now, for the first time, our employees have a sort of stake in the healthcare game, and they're being more careful with their healthcare expenditures.
Goddamn lying piece of shit, Mcfarlane. You know, I heard Stedman make that argument that somehow TriMet employees were using their health benefits because they were good benefits. I don't know anybody. I never met anybody there that went to the doctor because they wanted to use their benefits. The only time I ever used it, and every single person I know that used it because they needed to use it. Now that asshole Mcfarlane with his henchman Stedman put forth the argument that somehow we were using the health care because it was so good we were just going down and getting it. Now see, that is a fucking lie.
I think to a large extent because of that that co-insurance that they're experiencing for the first time. So those things added together have given us a little room in the budget. Now, sustaining that over a period of time is still going to be the big challenge, and dealing with those unfunded liabilities over a long term remain a challenge.
You see what a liar this man is, okay? They use this propaganda publicly to attack our first arbitration, and they're using the exact same propaganda today to attack the benefits now. I mean, there's been no, and the mainstream media is just spitting back what TriMet says. Nobody bothers to mention that we've already lost benefits. It's still the Cadillac benefits, best in the. That nobody bothers to bring up the fact that we've actually lost those Cadillac benefits. It's just a bunch of bullshit that comes out of his mouth about this.
But we can do those two things together. We can we can chew gum and walk at the same time. But we have to be really cautious about it, and we have to make sure that we're being very diligent. To that end, our board has adopted some financial policy.
Yeah, you have to be very diligent. When it comes to your union employees, you have to be diligent. But when it comes to you and all your henchmen, the sky's the limit. You want a deputy general man? Hey, Bob, come on down here. I got $200,000 a year for you. Harry, come on down here. I got $175,000 for you. Hey, I want a raise. I'll just hide my raise in a contingency budget. At the same time, I'm cutting fares. When it comes to them, the sky's the limit. But when it comes to the union employees, they have to be very conscious about what they do. What a bunch of crap.
Policies called Strategic Financial Plan, and they are guidelines for us in terms of making sure that we both continue to reduce the unfunded liabilities and make sure that the growth in both payroll tax and fares that are associated with growth can be reinvested in the community.
His answer and his henchman's answer to dealing with the unfunded obligations is to eliminate the obligations. That's his plan, is to eliminate the obligations one step at a time to where he has zero. Okay, he's not going to even be happy if he wins the next arbitration. He's going to want more later. Okay, this is a serious situation here. And I can't believe anybody shows up to TriMet and does a good job when your company is trying to screw you daily.
And the service the community needs and wants.
So how much of the longer-term picture depends on continuing to get concessions from the union on the labor contract?
it's entirely dependent on that, I would say. We would project that by about fiscal year 17, maybe 18, the lines start to cross again, and would be in a position, unless we achieve the kinds of, I think, very modest concessions we're asking of our ATU members right now.
Okay. A few years ago, you put a major organizational focus on safety after a tragic incident and a big safety review after that. This year, you've made some restructurings to address reliability. And prior to that, there have been a series of not such great performing days for Macs. Mm-hmm. So how are those efforts panning out, and what results are you seeing from both of those?
Let me start with the safety. As I've again indicated, we started a whole process of really making safety what we call the core value of everyone at TriMet. If we ask our riders what do they want from us, they may not even say safety, but we know the first thing they want is a safe ride. Then we talk about reliability and frequency and price. But safe is at clearly the top of the pyramid for everybody. So we have, I think, reconstituted and strengthened our safety department. We are involving a number of what we call continuous improvement teams throughout the organization on topics like safety. We've reinvigorated our safety committees. We have are beginning to implement what we call the safety management system overall. And I've recently installed a tracking system where we can actually do a better job of keeping track of the incidents, whether they be workers' comp incidents or other incidents, to really be able to go back and do the analysis necessary to correct conditions that might lead to that.
Let me comment on this because I look at the statistics, and actually I didn't see any improvement in safety at all in terms of numbers, congregate numbers, from before they had their safety program to now. There's no actual discernible change in the number of accidents, etc., on TriMet since the inception of their multi-million-dollar management safety people who go around talking about how safe everything is.
So it's always a work in progress, though. So what I would tell you is that we have a regular review on safety issues, and for example, in the last budget, we did a number of, for example, pedestrian crossings along the Blue Line, particularly on the east side, but also throughout the system, where we try to create more of the Z crossing kinds of connections, and where we're upgrading pedestrian crossings in other areas. The other thing we do is that is really begin to focus on the changes that are occurring around, for example, our MAX line. And one thing we're doing is when there's a lot of growth in an area, we've got to respond with enhanced pedestrian channelization and improvements. And so, for example, in this next budget, we're actually doing that and programming that for the 7th and Holiday Station, where we have 700 to 800 apartment units appearing on one side of the street that haven't been there for a long time. The Convention Center Hotel will be another site, and the Orenco development area in Hillsborough is another site where we're working on that. So maybe tell me if that answered your question about safety. Continues to be. I can tell you a few other things that are going on. For example, we're managing an FTA grant program where we're looking actually at this has been called the talking bus, but the warning signals.
So the second try at that technology.
A second try, and actually there's 4 different technologies being tested, and we'll go through that. So we're always looking at that. So there's a number of other initiatives that are underway to try to make sure that we're always being the best we can related to safety. And
do you have metrics to show what progress you're making?
We do have metrics. I don't have them off the top of my head. I would tell you that it's one of the things that's hard about safety is you don't want to rely entirely on lagging indicators like the number of crashes. And so then trying to get ahead of the curve and find out what your leading indicators are is a little challenging. And that's one of the things we're working on.
One of the reader questions we had is observed change in behavior along I-84, where the trains coming into the station used to ring a bell, and now they're sounding a horn. Is that a deliberate safety action?
Well, it's an example of that we're always alive on looking for new and better ways to make sure that we're safe. In some cases, frankly, we found that the bell actually works just as well as the horn, so we've discontinued the horn as in some of those situations. But you know, these are the kind of things we want to keep trying. Does it make a difference, and does it improve things, and then try it and measure the results.
Okay.
And your second
part was reliability.
Reliability. Thank you. So you're absolutely right. I have been focused on the reliability of the rail system. Knock on wood, lately it's been quite good, but we've had some bad incidents, and we don't want.
Lately it's been good. What, is he joking or what? They get and every now and then they get a few days in a row where there's no max disruptions that we know of. I mean, these things happen, and they won't tell anybody about it, and if we're not listening on the scanner, it will go right by. But generally speaking, there's been a lot of problems on the max line, more than last year than I can remember ever.
That to repeat. So a couple of things I tell you is, one is that we are putting an increased emphasis on the proper maintenance and preventive maintenance activities that are performed by TriMet sources. And to that end, we've actually asked an independent engineer, a firm you know, LTK Services, to bring in some outside experts to look at all of our maintenance practices. And
that's all they do around here is bring in outside experts, and I wonder where they get the millions every time they turn around and do this. I mean, they're constantly bringing in outside experts, you know, and contractors and subcon. Where's the money coming from for that? What do you mean you need outside experts? What the hell are we paying you for?
Suggest any improvements or changes that they think are necessary. The second thing I'd mention is that for the second year in a row in this fiscal year 15 budget, we've programmed about $53 million in both maintenance and rehabilitation projects, primarily focused on the blue line east of the Willamette River. And that includes, for example, changing out some of the track sections and switches that are now, frankly, approaching 30 years old and beginning to show very severe signs of wear, as well as the progressive rehabilitation of our light rail vehicles to make sure that they stay in top-notch shape. And what I would tell you is I'm concerned about it, and that's why we've stepped up the efforts and put both increased organizational focus on these efforts, as well as backing it up with resources. Too soon to know the results of that, but hopefully our customers will see improved and continuing reliability moving into the future. Right now, I think we're in the low 80% in terms of on time. I'd like to see that up 85–90% for MAX.